By the way, before I begin this presentation, I just wanted to quickly touch on the roles and responsibilities of SLPs with respect to reading and writing in children and adolescents. I took this straight from ASHA's website. It says, it is the position of the American Speech Language Hearing Association that speech language pathologists play a critical and direct role in the development of literacy for children and adolescents with communication disorders, including those with severe or multiple disabilities. The roles and responsibilities for SLPs include, but are not limited to preventing written language problems by fostering language acquisition and emergent literacy. I feel like that's something that we're very good at as speech language pathologists. Identifying children at risk for reading and writing problems, assessing reading and writing, providing intervention and documenting outcomes for reading and writing, and assuming other roles such as providing assistance to general education teachers, parents, and students, advocating for effective literacy practices, and advancing the knowledge base. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on these really quickly because I feel like, I know that when I finished grad school, I was really good at working on emergent literacy with phonemic awareness skills. I did a little bit of assessing reading and writing, but not a lot. I wasn't very good at identifying children that were at risk for reading and writing problems, and I did very little intervention for reading and writing, and working with the teachers and the parents on literacy skills. So that is why I just wanted to touch on this for just a minute, why I feel that it's so important that we incorporate literacy into our treatment programs even better. So on the SLP Summit Facebook group, I asked all of you if you are targeting literacy in therapy and how. And I was so impressed because out of over 1,000 comments, 99% of you responded that yes, you are targeting literacy. And as you can see below, these are some of the ways that you said that you are targeting literacy in therapy. And so I just want to tell you all how amazing you are and how I think it's so great that you are making that a priority in your treatment. There were a few of you that said that you do not target literacy or that you don't do it as much as you like, and you are interested in learning more ideas and techniques for targeting literacy. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start off with our first learning objective, which is to identify how to choose stories that will meet speech, language, and literacy objectives. Now, one of the reasons why I chose this as a learning objective is because when I first started using stories in therapy, I quickly learned how powerful they were, but it took a lot of planning for me. So I definitely had to prepare ahead of time and take the time to find stories that targeted the specific speech and language objectives that I was trying to target. And so it wasn't something that I could do on the fly very well. So we're going to go ahead and open up Little Stories Pro. So you can see that we have 82 stories in the app. Now that's a lot of stories. So we wanted to provide a way for you to be able to quickly sort the stories so that you could find exactly what you needed to target your specific goals. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see there's a little button you can push. And here you can see that you can sort the stories by story title. So if you're already familiar with the stories, you can quickly switch to different letters quickly to find the stories that you're looking for. You can also sort the stories by themes. The neat thing about this is we have 26 different themes in the app. We have themes like communicating with others, being kind and helping others. Let's see here. Overcoming fears. So these are great little stories that you can use to help work on social skills or thematic units or different things like that. You can also use the different themes to compare the stories to other stories that have similar themes, or and contrast them as well to how they're the same and how they're different. So I want to take a minute really quickly and talk about the major stages of literacy development. I feel like it's important to understand these so that when you're choosing stories based on reading level, if you understand these major stages, you're going to be able to choose a story that's appropriate for the child that you are working with. So stage 0 is the pre-reading stage, where the focus is on emerging literacy skills, like sound awareness, learning that individual sounds, that speech is made up of individual sounds, and some words start with the same sound or end with the same sound, things like that. Stage 1 is referred to as the initial reading period, where the emphasis during this stage is on phonics skill development. In this literacy developmental stage, children link sounds to letters and actively try to break the code of print. So this, I feel like, happens a lot of times in kindergarten and first grade as they're learning their sight words and just starting to learn to decode. Stage 2 has become, is the fluent, let's see here, stage 2 is the more automatic or fluent in the decoding of words. That's when the student has become more automatic or fluent. So, so this is when they're starting to work on their reading fluency and things like that. And then stage 3 is the reading to learn, where they are learning more vocabulary from reading than they are from speech. So when you have an understanding of these stages, it helps us as we choose our reading level. So, all right, so now we're gonna go ahead and talk about reading level. So in Little Stories Pro, we leveled our stories level A, level B, and level C. If you tap on the question mark next to level C, you can see exactly how we leveled these stories. So we leveled our stories according to their narrative complexity, their vocabulary difficulty, and the age appropriateness. So level A, the ages are ages 6.5 to 7.5. So that's like mid-first grade to second grade. Level B is ages 7 to 8.5, and level C is ages 8 to 9.5. So level B would be second grade, and level C would be third grade and maybe into fourth grade a little bit. The other way we leveled our stories, we used the Flesch-Kincaid system to level our stories. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here really quickly. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to flip over all of my story cards. On the back of the story card where you see the reading level, on the crow in the picture, you can see that it's level B, and next to that it says FK 0.1. And what that means is that's the Flesch-Kincaid score of 0.1. Now the Flesch-Kincaid was developed by the Army to create a way to level text, or to level text. So what they did is they created a formula that measures the number of words in a sentence and the number of syllables in a word. So the neat thing about this is when you flip over, when you're looking at a story and you see that it's a reading level B, so you're looking at a second grade reading level, you can also take into account the length of the sentences and the number of syllables in a word. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is you can also, you can also sort by phonemic target. I'm going to flip these story cards back over really quickly. So here you can see at the bottom, we have stories for the L sound. That includes all the positions, L initial, medial, final, and also mixed stories. There's 2 stories for every single level. We have all of the L blends, stories for all of those, as well as the pre-vocalic R's and all of the vocalic R's. So you can see we have Fairy Aaron, Blair's Dare, The Garden Party, Gary McCleary's Beard. That's a really fun story. I love that one. We have all of the R blends, the S stories, the S blends, and all of the stories for the TH sound. So we chose all of these specific phonemic targets to start with, because of course they're the most difficult ones and the ones that our kids are struggling with the most, especially at the age level that we're targeting these stories for. So that was part of the reason that we started with those targets. Okay. The next thing that I wanted to show you, we're going to flip the story cards over one more time, and I'm going to show you how, right on the back of the story card, you can see reading level, phonemic target, but you can also sort the stories by verb tense, or you can also select a story based on verb tense. So when we wrote these stories, one of the things that we wanted to do was try to balance. We wanted to have lots of present tense stories. We wanted to have lots of past tense stories. We wanted you to be able to quickly find those stories so that you can use these stories to target verb tense. But one of the things that we found that was very interesting is narratives sometimes are very difficult to write in a specific tense. So for example, on Blossom and Blake's Blizzard, you can see next to verb tense, it says tense shift. So if you tap on the details there, you can see that we put here that narratives can involve multiple time frames and thus can have shifts in tense that are correct. So I thought that this was really interesting as we were developing this, and we realized that sometimes it was really difficult to write a story that stayed within a specific tense. And it made me realize that this is one of the reasons why I think that it's so difficult for children to master verb tense at times, because as we're talking, we're constantly changing our verb tense based on our situation or the story that we're telling. And so it takes a lot of practice. So the neat thing about these stories that have a tense shift is you can use them to help the kids identify when the tense does shift. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that I wanted to show you is you can also look at the point of view for every story. When we wrote these stories, we wanted to make sure that we wrote stories in first person, second person, and third person. Most stories that young children read are written in the third person and are typically the easiest to retell. But we felt it was very important to include those first person and second person stories. It's also a great way to target pronouns, because you can talk about all of those, the different pronouns in the stories that are being used, and you can talk about who's telling the story and all of those things. So that's awesome. We just talked about sound-based narratives a little bit when we were talking about sorting stories based on the phonemic target. I just wanted to make a few points really quickly about why sound-based narratives can be so useful. One of which, of course, for auditory bombardment. The nice thing about these stories in Little Stories Pro is every single story that's targeting a phonemic target hits that target 20% of the time. So every single story in Articulation, or not Articulation Station, sorry, in Little Stories Pro is exactly 100 words, and at least 20 words in that story hit the phonemic target. The other nice thing is targeted speech practice. It's also great for identifying repetitive phonemes, which is great for phonemic awareness, and also learning the nuances of spelling. So we have a story in Little Stories Pro called Moose Juice Mess. So Bruce the Moose, he's the character that you see on the screen right now. He loves to make juice, and he's also very messy. So he makes a big mess all the time. So we're targeting the final S sound with this story. And it's kind of neat because when you look at all of the phonemic targets in the story, you can use it to work with kids to talk about how, even though all of these words end in the same sound, they're spelled differently. So we have 6 words that end with 2 S's. We've got the 3 words that end with a CE, 2 that are ending with SE, and 1 that ends with a single S. Okay. So now we're going to describe scaffolding strategies to adapt stories to the level of the learner. So the beautiful thing about stories is how you can adapt them to meet so many different speech and language targets. But also when you sit down with a child, stories that are engaging and have beautiful illustrations can capture the attention of very young children as well as children that are learning to read. So with a little adaptation, you can use these stories to help kids at lots of different levels. Here we are. Back to the iPad. Okay, we're gonna flip this over and we're gonna go find a story called Mammoths Back. Can everyone see this? Say yes if you can see my screen. Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and tap on Mammoths Back. Now, one of the nice things about this screen right here is you can use this as a little pre-reading exercise. We have a little sneak peek of the illustration on the left. So you can even just with that little sneak peek, you can use that to talk about what the children think might be happening in the story. You can make predictions. You can also read the story synopsis up above the title, where it says, a mammoth really needs a bath, P.U. But the bath is down a path and something is in the way. So after reading that synopsis, that's another great way to make a prediction. You can also tap on before you read, and you can review all of the sight words in the app before you read the story. You can also review all the phonemic target words or the challenge words in the app. The other nice thing is that you can review those in flashcards as well. So let's say we wanted to review these challenge words. Really quickly, the challenge words were chosen based on, here, I'll go back here and show you. The challenge words for every story are based on the vocabulary, the difficulty of the vocabulary, as well as how difficult a word was to decode. So that's how we chose the challenge words. So now we'll go practice these in flashcards. So it's really nice. You can go through the flashcards, give the child a chance to practice them so that they can be more successful as they read. Another nice thing is you can tap on the little dictionary icon in the bottom right corner of the flashcard and you can get a definition of that word. This is really great because when I've done this story with kids, most of the time, I ask them if they know what a mammoth is, and most of the time they don't. So we open up the little dictionary and we talk about how it's a large extinct elephant that's very hairy with long curved tusks. And then we talk about Ice Age and they all remember what a mammoth is. Okay, so when you are done reviewing the words, you can go ahead and read the story. So here we are in the story. Now, you can go ahead and listen to the story before you read. If you're working with a child that is at a stage 0 level reading, you can listen to it. Also, for a lot of fluency strategies, have the teacher, the speech pathologist, or the parent read the story to the child first before they read it. So if you press play right here, we're actually going to go ahead and listen to this story. It's a short story, but because of the examples that I'm going to show you of some of the things I did with some of the children, it will be helpful if you will have heard the story. So here we go.
Mammoths Back. I know a mammoth that needed a bath. P.U. I know a mammoth that needed a bath that lay at the end of a path. P.U. I know a mammoth that needed a bath, so we walked to that bath by taking that path. But on that path, there was a tall toll booth. P.U. I know a mammoth without any money. P.U. I have a brother who worked there that day. He plugged up his nose and ran far away. I know a mammoth, and what did he do? He took a bath. Phew.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the strategies that you can do with kids to help them. So if you open up the settings right here, if you're working with a stage 1 level reader, for example, when I started testing this app in the fall with my daughter who's 6 years old. She was in the just starting the first grade. So one of the things that we did was we came in here, and after reviewing the sight words in the pre-reading activity, we would bold the sight words just like this. And then we would close this and we would read together. So her job was to read the sight words and I read everything else. So she would read, I know a, and then I would say mammoth, and so on. So the next thing that you can do is you can actually change the font. There's been some research that says that serif fonts can be easier for some kids as far as eye tracking goes. So that can be a useful feature. Another thing you can do is you can switch to an early reader format. So an early reader format shortens the length of the sentences and puts them in smaller units of meaning. So this can be helpful for kids as well. You can also turn on a reading helper. This helps with eye tracking. So as the child is reading through the story, this helps them keep their place and know where they are. Okay. You can also bold the phonemic targets if you're working with some of your speech kids and you want them to be able to see their phonemic targets, or you can bold the challenge words. So there's lots of fun features that you can use to adapt the app. You can also, if you don't want them to see the illustration, you can take this little gray bar right here and pull it all the way over to the side, and then you have a larger text view. You can also turn the story vertically and play the story for the child if they're really young and they're only interested in the illustration. Now we're going to talk about how to measure reading fluency while recording reading error data, vocabulary error data, and speech error data. So over here on the right, we have the Brave Prince and Briar Rose, and the Brave Prince tells you to remember the value of practice. So as speech pathologists, of course, we love practice, and we love any way that we can get data. So I'm going to show you some great ways that you can get data. So now what we're going to do in order to measure reading fluency, we're going to tap on the little stopwatch in the lower corner of the text right there. And when that comes up, all you have to do is press begin, and you'll get a little countdown. After the countdown, the child begins reading. I tell the kids to read their best, not their fastest. If there's a word that they don't know, just skip it, and we'll talk about it after they're done reading. For some children, you can see in the right-hand corner, we have a stopwatch that's going. If this gives any of your clients anxiety, you can just tap on it, and the timer will go away, even though it is still timing you. It is still timing the child using the app. So, and you can turn that back on if you want to. When you're all done, you press stop, and you can score it now, or you can score it later, or you can even start over. So if your reading fluency test was interrupted by the intercom that came on to announce indoor recess, then no worries, you can always start over. So here, we'll go ahead and score now. To score a story, you just, as you listen to the story,
Begins reading.
so I just play right there. So you would listen to the child reading the story, and then you would just tap on a word, and then you have the choice to mark the error as a reading error, a vocabulary error, or a speech error. So one thing to note, people ask me all the time, how do I know it's a vocabulary error? So before I read the story, when we're reviewing those challenge words in the beginning of the story, I'll ask kids, like, for example, mammoth. I ask them, do you know what a mammoth is? And if they told me they didn't know what a mammoth was, then at this point, I would mark that as a vocabulary error. So then as they read, I can just mark reading errors, I can mark speech errors, whatever. I can say that that was a reading error. If they skip a word and they don't read it at all, it's considered a reading error also. So as you can see, everything turns red here. So if you want to know what it looks like, if you want to know what it looks like, you can tap on the little circle above reading that says 2, and you can see exactly how many errors you marked as reading errors. You can also see the vocabulary errors that you marked and the speech errors that you marked. We're going to talk about reading fluency now. So as a speech pathologist, reading fluency is probably not our area of expertise, but I think that it's beneficial, especially as we read the expectations that we have to help support teachers and to help identify where there may be concern. So it's good to know what is considered age appropriate. So when you do that reading fluency test that I just showed you, at the very end, it automatically calculates the words correct per minute for you, and I'll show you what that looks like in the scores in just a minute. But you can see here that in the first grade, they don't measure reading fluency until winter, and they should be at 23 words correct per minute. The interesting thing about this data is you can see, of course, they're progressing every year, and by the time they're in the 6th grade in the spring, they progress up to 150 words per minute. By the time they're in the 8th grade, they're only progressed up to 151 words per minute. So, and you can see also here that there's nothing reported beyond the 8th grade, and it says that it's due to the fact that when we read aloud, generally we do not read faster than what can be read at an 8th grade reading level. So that's something to keep in mind. So it's just a nice number to keep in your head that 150 words correct per minute is a nice target. Anything faster than that is too fast. Another nice thing about Little Stories Pro is that every single story is exactly 100 words. So if you want to know, it makes it easier for determining reading accuracy. And reading accuracy is important because if a child reads, only has 5 reading errors on these 100-word stories, and that means that they're reading at an independent level of reading. If they miss 10 or more, then they're still at an instructional level. And if they miss more than 10, then their reading level is at a frustrational level. So the 100-word stories make it really easy to monitor that and make sure you've chosen a story that is appropriate for the kids. Here's another interesting little fact. I was working with a client that has been working on his R sounds, and he's been doing really, really well. And getting to the point that I was starting to think that we were almost there. But mom's reporting that he's still speaking really, really fast at home. And when he speaks fast, of course, his the clarity of his R sounds decreases, and he's not saying them as well as he should. So I thought it was really interesting to go up and look up average speaking rates. And I found that the average person speaks at 100 to 130 words per minute. The professional voiceover artist is 150 to 160 words per minute, and the auctioneer is 250 to 400 words per minute. So basically, that little reading fluency test that I showed you, if a child is reading, you can also use that, especially if they're a good reader, to monitor their rate of speech. Okay, so we're back in the app, and I want to go and show you some examples of some of the kids that I've worked with. So I had the opportunity, I called up the principal at our local elementary school when we were developing Little Stories Pro, and I asked her if I could come in and read with some of the second graders in one of the classes. And so she obliged, and I went in, and these kids came in one at a time. I'd never met them before, and I had no idea where their reading level was, if they had speech errors or anything. But I just want to play for you one of the little girls that I read with. Her name was Taylor. We read Mammoths Back together. And I'm going to go in here so that you can listen to her read and just follow along for just a minute. Here we go.
I know many things that need a plan. Yes, I know mother at meeting both and both that align at the end of a path. Yeah. I know a mother would that needed a birthday, so he went to that booth by taking that booth, but...
Okay, we'll pause it there. Was everyone able to hear her reading? Haley? Yes? Okay. So you can see that she was, this was the first time that she ever read this story. And I went back in the very next day, and before I read with her again, we opened up the story that she had just read. And as you can see, she had 39 reading errors on that story. What was impressive, like just how we just learned with reading accuracy, more than 10 errors on a story is considered frustrational reading level. But I was so impressed with Taylor because she just kept on going. She didn't seem frustrated at all, so that was awesome. But anyway, so when I went back in the next day, before we read the story again, we reviewed all of her reading errors and flashcards. So we went through every single error for every word that she had missed the day before. And after we did that, we went back and we read the story again. Now I'm going to play for you how she read day 2, second time ever reading this story.
I know a mammoth that needed a bath. P.U. I know a mammoth that needed a bath that laid at the end of a path. P.U. I know a mammoth that needed a bath, so he went to that bath by taking that path, but one on that path there was a toll booth. P.U.
Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there. But you can see what a huge difference a single day made. But really it was more about, the other thing that I did is I played, she got to listen to how she read the first day. And I feel like that, number one, was very, very powerful to her, because I don't think she realized what she sounded like when she was reading, number one. Number two was the fact that we were able to review all of the vocabulary words that she had missed. And then number three was, I feel like, just repeated reading. Kids' accuracy improves quite a bit with repeated reading. So I think that that was very, very powerful for me to see. I wanted to actually play one more thing for you, because we were talking about speech rate. So the other client that I was telling you about that I was working on with his R's, his name is Carson. So we'll go ahead and open up. I want to play for you when he read Robot Rescue. Now he is in the 4th grade, and he's a very good reader. So he was just doing his best for me. So we'll go ahead and listen.
Reached my room, oh no, the window is open. Red-head robot is drenched in a puddle of rain. I turned him on, rah, rah, rah. My best robot is ruined. There's no time to lose. Robbie to the rescue. I grabbed my wrench and removed Red's back cover. I gently rub his insides. I rub his joints. I remove his head and rub it. Then I return Red's head back into the socket. I push the reset button. The gears rattle. Red rotates. Hello, Robbie says Red.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop. But you can see there that he was reading really fast. And so I had a little talk with him about how important it is to slow down, but I don't think that he realized how fast he goes. The nice thing that was powerful for him was to be able to see that number, that he was reading at 163 words per minute. And I talked with him about how we need to slow it down so that it's not faster than 150 words per minute. So it gives him a target to shoot for. And that's something that I appreciated. Repeated reading is when a student reads the same text over and over again until the rate of reading has no errors. The interesting thing about this strategy was that it was developed for kids with learning disabilities. The educators quickly realized that all students can benefit from this strategy. It also helps increase not only reading fluency, but reading comprehension. So just like Marisha was talking about with reading stories again and again and using them over and over for a month, it only helps improve comprehension. So there's nothing wrong with reading stories again and again. Plus, the nice thing about Little Stories Pro is kids like to watch their scores go up. It gives them more confidence in reading and makes them really excited. The guidelines and steps to follow when you use the repeated reading strategy. So number one, it says to choose a story that is approximately 50 to 200 words. I thought it was really interesting that it said a passage that is 100 words long seems to work the best, which is nice because every single story in Little Stories Pro, again, is exactly 100 words long. You can select a story passage that is decodable rather than predictable. So that's also important. So that's when you take into account the reading level of the child that you're working with. You want to select a few words that you think will be hard for the students to learn and explain them. So that's where the pre-reading strategy comes in, where we talked about reviewing the challenge words or the phonemic targets or the sight words before you read the story. You want to read the story or passage aloud to the students, and then you have the student read the passage to you. And then you have the students reread the passage as many times as needed until the text is fluent. So, a quote that I like to use with my own children is, don't practice until you get it right, practice until you can't get it wrong. So we all know, I think, as speech pathologists, the value of practice. That's something that we're pretty good at. Here are a couple more quotes that I feel like are encouraging to help us to really try to increase the amount of literacy that we do in our therapy rooms. It said, this is from the National Institute of Health. They reported that 85 to 90% of students who receive early targeted support can develop average reading skills. And so that's incentive for us to really try to target those skills and support the classroom teachers as well as the parents. Research also indicates that after the 4th grade, literacy intervention and remediation programs are only beneficial for approximately 13% of students who are struggling with reading. So I think that's another reason to target them early in grades K to 4 as much as we can. Okay, so the next learning objective is to discuss how to assess and teach story structure using a narrative model. So I feel like this is very important and something that we talk a lot about as speech language pathologists to help kids be able to fine-tune their oral narratives as well. So in the words of the third possum from our story, The Three Little Possums, if you're going to build something, build it smart. All right, here we go. So we're gonna open up Mammoths Back again. And we're gonna scroll down to the bottom of the story where it says check comprehension. So here you can see that you can choose from story retell and sequencing, WH questions, and story talk. So we're gonna start by talking about story retell and sequencing. So with story retell, you can tap on story retell and you can tap right here to record the child retelling the story to you. Now, if you don't want them to have a visual prompt while they retell the story, you just tap on the picture and that visual prompt will disappear. When they're done retelling the story, you press stop, and then you can go and score their retell. Okay, so here you can see that we are looking to see that they introduce the story by telling about that they introduce the story with a character and the setting by talking about the orientation. If you want an example of that, you can tap on the question mark in the right-hand corner. And you can see that for this story, they may have said something like, once there was a mammoth that needed a bath. So if they said something along those lines, then you would say, yes, they got it correct, or kind of, or no, not at all. Okay, we also want to know, did they talk about the complication in the story? So, but the bath was at the end of a path, and on that path there was a toll booth. So did they talk about that problem? Did they talk about the action that the characters took to solve the problem? Did they talk about the resolution to the problem? And did they talk about the ending? Now, these last two I feel like are especially important because kids with language delays often struggle with the including an ending to a story. Now, it's interesting because in oral narratives, there's no last page to turn in a story, so it's up to the communicative partner to let you know when they're done telling the story. So examples, how this story ended was few. They could have said something like, that was a very smelly mammoth, no more PU, don't get in the way of a mammoth's bath. So there's all kinds of different examples of how they could have ended the story. You can also score, I'm not gonna finish that, expressive language. So you can score whether they're using their nouns and pronouns correctly, their verbs correctly, their adjectives and adverbs, their prepositions, and did they use good rhythm and expression when they retold the story. So now I want to go and show you a quick example of a girl that I did a story retell with named Winnie on Mammoths Back. So we're going to go and listen to her story retell. Okay, so here we go.
So the mammoth had to take a bath, and that guy's brother had to run away because he stinted, so he plugged his nose. And the mammoth, he needed to go take one. So he brushed his fur and he started to do it. And the guy said, I know a mammoth that didn't have any money. And that's all I can remember.
Oh, good.
Okay, so with Winnie, I was able to go ahead and quickly score her story retell for story structure just by listening to her retell, and also her expressive language, but I can also take notes. So if I tap on notes here, I can show you some of the notes that I took about her story retell. Number one, the first thing that I noticed was that she told her story out of sequence. So the action and complication were also incomplete, and there was no ending. So you can see that she started with the orientation, then second she talked about the action, then the resolution, and then finally the complication, and then for the ending she just said, that's all I can remember. I guess you could give her credit if you're just trying to, if you're only giving credit for communicating the fact that she's done telling the story, that would be fine, but she didn't actually wrap up the story. I also took notes on all the nouns that she used. So she used 8 unique nouns, 9 out of 9 were used correctly. She used 2 pronouns, 6 out of 6 were used correctly. She used 9 verbs, 9 unique verbs, 10 out of 11 were used correctly. So I gave her credit for using verbs correctly since there was only 1 that she missed. She didn't use any adjectives or adverbs or prepositions when she retold the story. Now, one thing about our 100-word stories is there aren't a lot of adjectives and adverbs in them because of the brevity of the stories, but you can also use the illustrations and the questions that we talk about later to work on adjectives and adverbs as well as prepositions, and I'll show you a little bit about that. Okay, so we're going to close that, and we're going to go back really quickly into Mammoths Back, and I'm going to show you our sequencing activity. So we've talked about story retell. This is sequencing right here. So the nice thing about our sequencing activity is it's more than just putting the events of the story in order. It actually teaches story structure. So you can, if you're working with a child that doesn't read, you can read the parts to the child and ask them if they feel like that's where they go. So let's pretend that the child we're working with doesn't read. I might say something like, okay, first it says, finally the mammoth took his bath. Does that sound like the first part of the story? Is that how we start a story? So they could say yes or no, and we could go through each part until we find out how we would start a story. And then we would move that piece into place. So once there was a mammoth that needed a bath. Now, if a child moves a tile into the incorrect place, like if you take finally the mammoth took his bath and try to place it in the second position, it will snap back, but the child will not get credit for placing that in the correct order. And I'll show you how that goes at the end. So here we're going to put this in order now. Now the fun thing about this is you can see, like I said, after they have sequenced the story, we are set up to teach them story structure. So when I was working with Winnie, I was able to now review the story in the correct order with prompts like, once there was. That's a great way to introduce a story. So I can teach her that. Once there was a mammoth that needed a bath. The next thing is the complication, but. I like to teach kids that word, but, so that when they're retelling a story, maybe if they forget to use the complication, I can interject but as a reminder to help them remember to use to talk about the problem. So, but the bath was at the end of a path, and on that path there was a toll booth. So introduces the action. So the mammoth went toward the toll booth. He was so smelly that the toll booth man ran away. And finally, the mammoth took his bath. So here we've talked about the orientation, complication, action, and resolution. We don't have ending on here, but this is a great way, since there's so many ways to wrap up a story. At this point, you can ask the child, now how do you think the mammoth feels since he was able to take his bath? And you can use words like now the mammoth is clean, or now the mammoth is happy because he's not stinky anymore. Things like that. So those can help the kids remember to use all the different parts of speech. So I wanted to share this quick quote right here from Carol Strong. It says, Merritt and Lyles reported that students with language impairments tend to use initiating events and attempts, but frequently end their episodes without direct consequences. So that's one of the reasons why that resolution and ending piece is so important to teach. And that's why it's nice that we have those prompts to help teach the kids to remember to include all of those parts of the story. Okay, so now we're going to move on. Oh, shoot. Okay, let's see here. Okay, the fifth learning objective is examine how different kinds of questions support the ability to listen to and process questions as well as answer questions. So our WH questions, we ask, who is the story about? Where does it take place? What is the problem and how is it solved? So really we're trying to highlight key story structure, key components of story structure. We've also created a pause here so that you can get a spontaneous response. So here we have, who is the story about? At this point, maybe you could have the child write down the answer, who they think it is, and then you could have them check their answer after that. We have multiple choice options for those kids that need a little bit of a prompt. Here is, where does the story take place? on a path that led to a bath. What is the problem or complication and how is it solved? So those are our WH questions. I'm going to start moving a little faster since I can see I'm starting to run out of time. This is story talk. With story talk, we have highlighted different kinds of questions that are more specific to the story. So we have questions that require the reader to pull the answers from the text, that require inferential thinking, that require the reader to express their opinion or share their experience, or to explore and create narratives. So here you can see we have, can you use your words to say how a smelly mammoth would both look and smell? This is a great way to determine if the kids can use adjectives or adverbs very well. Use the illustration in the text. Can you tell me what a toll booth is and how it works? So here you can see in the upper right-hand corner, you can reference the story again and go back and look at the illustration and talk about, remember what a toll booth is and talk about that a little bit more. So we have several different questions. We'll go ahead and skip through those. We also have a closer look. This is really neat because it's a closer look at the narrative itself. This is something that I suggest teachers and speech pathologists to actually read through before you read the story, because there may be some interesting things that you want to talk about with the kids. Mammoths Back, for example, is a cumulative tale, so you can talk about what a cumulative tale is. It targets things like rhyme and onomatopoeias and wordplay. So those are all interesting things to talk about and can teach about narratives. Here with related stories, these are other stories that have that target the same theme. So with staying with a task, you can then go and read one of these stories and compare and contrast how they're the same and how they're different. So we're going to go ahead and leave this. I want to show you, oh, I forgot to show you really quickly, just a fun little thing here. You can also do a tongue twister activity. This is just a fun little challenge for kids that they love. The mammoth took a bath by the path, and I encourage them to try to say that 3 times fast. So that's a fun little speech exercise. As a reinforcement activity, we have coloring pages. So you can go and find the story that you just did. Here we go. You can print it, you can email it home, or you can color it right in the app. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this to my iPad vertically. Oh, apparently it won't work here. Okay, so you turn the iPad vertically when you're coloring. And the neat thing about this is inside this little coloring page, our little bee is always hiding someplace different. So this is how I work on prepositions. Before I start coloring, or the child starts coloring, we talk about where that little bee could be. And then when we find him, we talk about where he is. So there he is. He's on the mammoth's back in this picture. So we may have guessed that he was in the river. He could be under a tree. He could be, you know, on the path, whatever. So they can talk about prepositions that way. You can also, after you color the story, you can, you know, talk about, work on adjectives and things like that, and talk about, you know, describe different things in the picture. The other fun thing about this is you can reset it by pushing the button in the lower right-hand corner, and the bee will be hiding again someplace different. So now we can guess again where the mammoth is. And look at that, he's on his tusk this time. So that's kind of fun. Okay, so now we're gonna go and show you what the results look like. So I'm gonna use Scarlett, for example. This is my daughter. You can see that I actually started reading with her using this app earlier in the year, but I lost that data. So the earliest data that I have is from November 2nd. She read Jace's Race, and she read that at 35 words correct per minute. The nice thing about the story data down here is you can sort it by date, you can sort it by story, so you can see all the times that she read Jace's Race. She read it again on the 3rd and went up to 62 words per minute, and then again on the 9th, she read it at 71 words per minute. So that's kind of nice. You can also sort it by like what was completed with comprehension. You can see the little circles on the right. The circles that are filled in show you what was completed. So you can see next to Mammoths Back on November 3rd, we actually did a story retell, we did the sequencing activity, and we did the WH question. So I have scores for all of those things. Up above, you can see that we are graphing the words correct per minute, which is awesome because the kids can see their progress over time. Now, our graph points every single day. If you read more than one story for that day, we will graph the average for that day. So if you tap on a data point, let's see here, you can see that on 1-4, Scarlett's average was 54 words correct per minute. So that's kind of nice. On the right-hand side, you can see that we're also graphing reading errors, vocabulary errors, and speech errors. So, and the average again for the day. Like you already saw, let's see here. You saw what it looks like. We'll go into Taylor again. This is what it looks like, you know, with the reading errors, vocabulary errors, and speech errors. You saw how we can go back and edit those results and practice them on flashcards. The same thing with the story retell. We can go back and edit the results and make changes or take notes. We also have the scores for the sequencing and the WH questions. You can also share the scores by tapping on share scores. You can share a PDF, you can email it, you can print it, or you can email the PDF. So let me show you what an email looks like here for Taylor. You can see here that we have all of the information, all of her errors, her comprehension results, her notes, and also the story itself. So you can send this home for home practice, in addition to sending home the coloring page for home practice. The nice thing about sending the coloring page is it's a great way to work on story retell at home. They can go home and tell their parents about the story that they read at school. So that's really nice. Another nice thing about the coloring pages is if you're working in mixed groups, you can print out a coloring page for the story that you're going to work on that day and have each child work on coloring it until it's their turn. It's a great pre-reading activity as well as post-reading activity. So that is really awesome as well. So another fun little small little reinforcement activity is if you go back to the home screen or the title screen of the app, there's fun little Easter eggs here that the kids love to discover. So if you tap on Holly Koala, her balloons pop and fall down. You know, if you tap on Flynn, he'll do a little flip. The sleeping sloth, you wake them up. So things like that are kind of fun. Okay, so if you're in the app, you go back to the data screen. Let me just move this over here. Okay, so from the data screen, you can see all the names on the left. If you just tap on edit, the little edit button, then you'll get those little delete symbols on the left. So if we wanted to delete anyone, we could go and delete myself because all of my data is fake. And then all I would have to do is hit delete and I would be completely removed from my data. So I'll go ahead and keep that. Okay, you do this, if any of you are using Articulation Station, you do it exactly the same way. You can also swipe to the left and your little delete thing will come up too. So that's another way you can do that. First of all, books are amazing. I love books. This app is not trying to replace books in any way at all, but there are some advantages to using technology. Number one, you've got 82 stories at your fingertips at all times. Every single story is exactly 100 words, which we learned is great for measuring reading accuracy, reading fluency. It's also great for speech fluency, for when you're doing stuttering, working with stuttering kids to take a speech fluency sample. They're all sound saturated stories, which are hard to find quite often. There's audio for every story. You can easily change your story format. You can add the reading helper. You can track your reading fluency and accuracy. You can create all of your reading errors, vocabulary errors, and speech errors into flashcards. You can review the reading. Let's see here. So you can save your recordings. You can track data for story structure and expressive language. You've got the sequencing activity and WH questions. So there's really a lot right here. The first question is, are there any stories appropriate for older elementary students? So the app was written for K through 4th grade. Kindergartners using it for listening comprehension and learning and understanding story structure and answering questions and stuff like that. And as far as the reading difficulty, it's for up to 3rd grade students. But there has been a lot of research that has been done that says that children that are struggling with reading that are actually older kids benefit greatly from reading children's stories to younger siblings, younger kids that are neighbors and friends. And so I would definitely still use this with older kids. to help with reading fluency as well as for speech. Like I said, I've actually used this with a 10th grader for speech, and he didn't mind reading the story at all. The one thing that I did do is I expanded the text field so that he wasn't staring at the illustration. But surprisingly, I've actually had a junior high student as well that loves the coloring activity at the end. So it's up to you. Like I said, every story can be adapted, but it was written for K through 4. This app is not on the iPhone right now. It's only on iPad. So you have to search for it from your iPad. It's also only available for iOS 11. So if you have an old iPad, you're not going to be able to find this app. So that's something that is important to note, which I forgot to mention. Let's see here. Is there a way to correlate Dibble's levels to the reading levels in the app? So these reading levels are not the same as other reading levels, but I think that once you get used to using them, you'll be able to, you'll become very comfortable with them and figure out which stories are going to work best for your users. Can you go over the level text again? How we leveled the text, I think that's what you're asking. We leveled the text based on the narrative complexity, the theme, and the difficulty of the words that were in the app as far as decoding and things like that. We also used the Flesch-Kincaid scoring system, so there's really a two tiers of leveling. So we leveled them for first, second, and third graders, and within those we use the Flesch-Kincaid, which levels based on number of syllables per word and number of sentences in a number of words in a sentence. Let's see here. How many different phoneme targets are there? Does it include earlier developing phonemes? Right now, we only have stories for later developing phonemes. So all the phonemes for the L blends, the S blends, the R, all the vocalic R's, the R blends, and all the TH sounds. Is Little Stories Pro available for iPad? Oh yeah, like I said, it is only on iPad. You cannot print out the flashcards, but you can, like I showed you, when you email home the word list, they'll be able to see the words that they're struggling with.